Hello and welcome to 2020. It's a new year, new beginnings and all of that stuff. I've been really shitty at posting this content for you guys, which is really bad of me because I really appreciate all of your support. It's helped me so much to actually just survive on a daily basis. And I'm getting super motivated by seeing all of your stuff. Alex is doing some great work. If you don't know him, Alex Liao, check it out. Really fantastic job. It's super nice to see all of you guys' improvement as well. I'm happy that you're sending pictures and stuff like that. But yeah, starting this Patreon, my initial idea was not to be in the studio talking about different type of subjects. It really wasn't. However, I'm in Scandinavia. It's about 0 degrees. It's January. It's raining every single day. Overcast. It's like the possible worst conditions you can imagine for plein air painting. I'd rather go out in a snowstorm than to go out and paint in this. I get really unmotivated to go out. Generally in an overcast lighting, but when it's this wet and this cold, you get so cold so fast just because the weather is really shit. So I'm crossing my fingers to get a couple of days of sun soon enough, and as soon as that happens, I'll be out there and I'm making more videos for you guys. But today I thought I'll stay in and do this talk. Hopefully the camera will pick up the colors, because what I want to do today is to talk a little bit about the colors that I'm using as I put them on the palette, why I use them, and ultimately where I want to end up with this video is to talk about the topic of greens. Green is a super interesting color and it's a fascinating subject, so I really want to dive into that with you guys, give you a couple of exercises that you can work with, and that's it. Let's get to it, yeah? Okay, so I'm gonna start normally from dark to light. The idea, so this is a quite a modern palette. I don't necessarily use super modern pigments. They're still quite traditional, but I have a dark ultramarine blue because it's within my budget right now. I get quite a good amount of paint for a reasonable amount of money. So ultramarine deep is what that's called. Rembrandt tend to have a little bit more filler in there, so it's not going to be as potent as maybe the Old Hollands is. So just to get into the basics a little bit, I'm not going to talk too much about the color theory, but the principle with this palette is that you're painting with the primary colors, meaning that you mix the rest of the colors. Primary colors is blue, a certain type of yellow, and a red. Then we have the secondary colors, which is green, purple, and orange. But with these three, blue and yellow, we mix green, yellow and red, we mix orange, blue and red, we mix purple. If you don't know the basic color theory, I'll post a picture in Patreon and you can see it below. But okay, so something that's important with this palette, because we're mixing a lot of colors, we want to have a good range. We need a range in values and we need a range in temperature. So the ultramarine dark gets to be the warm reddish blue, representing the dark blue that we have. And with that, we also have the cerulean blue from Old Holland, oxides of cobalt and tin, PV35. This is super thick and chunky and quite heavy. Most brands that produce the cerulean has a lot of thinner in it, so it's not potent whatsoever. It's so nice. It's really nice. It's super expensive. That's why I go to Spain and buy it. I wouldn't buy this in Norway because it's about what, 90 euros. I tried to stay away from using this too much. It's a lovely color for doing the sky, but normally in a landscape painting you have so much sky in there that the ceruleum runs out quick if you're just going to use ceruleum. So try to be careful with it, save it quite a bit, see what other colors I can use for the sky, and I'm gonna give you another example what you can use instead of the ceruleum just for the sky, and still get that kind of opaque greenish blue type of sky. However, this is genius for mixing these super bright, saturated, sunlit grass patches, especially backlit, frontlit too. It works really well when the grass is a little bit colder and you need that bluish type of green. So really, really nice. My absolute favorite one in the world, cerulean blue. So we have one dark red and warm blue. Now we have a brighter greenish blue that is cold. Now that means that we have both warm and cold, dark and light of the blues, and they have different qualities to them. So the dark one is more red, the bright one is more green. Then we have a cobalt blue from Old Holland. Same, the texture and the quality of it is just incredible. I feel like a cobalt is a very, very rich type of pigment. It just has this type of vibrancy to it that you just don't get with any other blue. And to me, it just works wonders. It's oxide of cobalt and aluminum PB28. If you're buying Rembrandt cobalt, you would want to have the dark blue one instead. This is just cobalt blue. The Rembrandt would be a deep or a dark cobalt blue. Also Old Holland's cobalt blue, which is supposed to be a very neutral blue, neither warm nor cold, neither red nor green. I'll let you make the decision, because this is always a topic people just really enjoy discussing and arguing over. So that means we have 3 different types of blues. And then we move over to the first yellow that I put down. The first yellow is a gold ochre. Gold ochre from Old Holland as well. It's really nice. It's just a natural ochre pigment. It's not the yellow ochre, because the yellow ochre is quite green. And I tend to go too green when I'm mixing my grays, for example. If they're supposed to be a warm gray, a yellowish gray, I tend to go too green for some reason. Probably because I overuse blue. I love blue. So I try to stay away from green, earthy yellow, and I have this gold ochre, which is rather reddish than anything else. But the consistency is quite problematic. I've heard that people use like a different type of ochre from Italy. Is it Roman ochre? That again, for me, that's way too greenish. I do not like, and it's really oily, and I do not like that consistency. I'd rather have this consistency and use more medium to mix it. So with this, you sort of have to have medium as well. If you want to use it, you have to have some type of medium, terps and almond oil or linseed oil. Really, it's up to you, but it's definitely necessary. Then we have another type of yellow, cadmium yellow middle, or you can use the cadmium yellow dark from Old Holland, I think. This is a warm, high chromatic yellow, very potent and powerful. Just push some on there. So it's very, very creamy and oily in comparison to the chalky and chunky gold ochre. But really nice to have a bright yellow that is warm and chromatic or saturated. Then we have the cadmium yellow light, which would be our other high chromatic yellow that is still quite cold. This is super nice for for that sunlit snow just shining brighter than the brightest white. You can add a little bit of that to the white and still keep it super bright and cool, which is nice. Because the cadmium pigments take over quite a bit, especially if you mix it with the white, they will have their say. So now we have a dark yellow, which is an earthy color, which is nice because we're naturally painting the landscape. We have two chromatic yellows, one that's darker, one that's brighter, one that's warm, one that's cold. So this will be towards more green, towards more red, and then this one as well with red inside. Then we come to the reds. I go to I'm gonna put the alizarin red here. The alizarin red, I'm not 100% sure about. I go between the alizarin red and a type of, well, a darker cadmium red. So go for the alizarin as the dark red. That is more towards a blue and it's cold. This is quite modern and it's similar to rose madder, I think, ultramarine rose. However, it's not as chalky or chunky. This is a bit more fluid, but it's really, really potent. So just a tiny bit of that will conflict with your whole painting a lot of times. Normally I use it to mix darks with this alizarin red and the alizarin blue, so you can get something instead of putting black on your palette. Because when we have black, and a lot of things tend to get dirty, we put black in everything to make it a darker value instead of trying to think of the color darker in value, you know? You can't just put black and have it as a way to make things darker, you know? Okay. So we have 3 blues, 3 yellows, and 3 reds. This would be a cadmium middle red and a cadmium light vermilion. So we have one that's warm and brighter and one that's a little bit darker and colder. They're still quite warm, and especially in comparison to the alizarin. So in a sense it's all relative, but so yeah, whatever. This is the palette. Obviously, with this we need white. I tend to have my white in the corner, and I always go for the titanium white from Old Holland. Why I use the Old Holland ones is because it's only the PW6 pigment in here. Now the titanium white from Titan and the titanium white from Rembrandt, it has PW4 and 6, and I think that's essentially trying to be a lead white imitation, so it is more transparent. I find it really frustrating, but I also know that a lot of landscape painters back in the days, they were painting obviously with lead white, so it was transparent, or it had that transparent quality to it at least. But yeah, so I like to keep it opaque. That's why I stay with Old Holland. But okay, so now to this palette I tend to add a couple of more pigments. I tend to use cadmium orange. I don't have any now. Well, I have a little bit. I tend to use cadmium orange as well. Just because with cadmium orange and the blues I can make a good gray quite fast, and I can kill the blues quite easily instead of adding both yellow and red. So I just reach a result a little bit faster. I'm a stressed out person in general, so that's really... But okay, before we dive into the greens, I really want to mention this pigment. This pigment I was recommended by a friend, Joe Altwer. If you do not know him, also check him out. Fantastic painter. If you're living in California and stuff, he tends to have workshops and stuff there. He's a fantastic guy, and he recommended phthalo green. to use together with ultramarine in the skies, and I really find that it's working super well. So you put a little bit of phthalo. Now this one is extremely potent, so I barely add any. It's extremely potent. So I used to use it quite a bit when I was in Spain to be a little bit more coloristic and colorful with my works. And all my brushes were just completely colored with the phthalo green. So it's a very modern pigment, and I don't know too much about the process of making it or what it comes from, but it is very potent. However, with this pigment, we can, together with the ultramarine and some white, let's do another one. Get a very beautiful sky color. You know, I hope that shows. And to me, this would sort of represent the same as a cerulean and white. They would be quite similar in their colors. This can go a bit more green quite easily, so you have to be very careful with the phthalo, but it does save you money on the cerulean. Okay, so I mean, greens in general is quite a tricky color to understand. It's super fascinating because green is the color that we see most of in nature. I think red is the one that we see the least variations of, and green is what we see the most of. I think like people who are talking about evolutionary psychology and stuff like that, they mean that in the jungle, whatever, it's important for us to tell the difference between the different types of greens, because there will be a predator in there probably, or maybe hunting for us, and it's for our own sort of safety, or that's how we've evolved. I don't know. We can only speculate in that, but it sounds pretty cool. But so naturally green is quite tricky to grasp, because the variation in greens are so big, and especially in nature, variation is to an extreme. So we really need to be true to that, remember it, and make use of it. If we want to paint realistically, we really have to imitate that, give the viewer the opportunity to walk around in those variations, right? And we don't have a million types of greens in our palette, at least not ready mixed or pre-mixed. So we're gonna have to mix all of those greens. Another thing that is important to understand with green is that the complementary color of green is red. Red is the complementary to green, meaning that it will either bring out the green, give more life to it, or if you mix it together, it will end up killing the green instead. So we're gonna have to use red with those greens as well in order to make good variations in there, right? Because variation is the opposite of repetition, and we really want to stay away from repetition in landscapes. Okay, so there's really not a good, at least I don't feel like there's a good formula for the greens. Like, oh, ultramarine 2 parts and 1 part cadmium yellow and a dash of the cadmium dark red, that will give you the oak tree 500 meters away, backlit. You know, I'm sure there's like a system for it if you want to develop one and find one, but ultimately my belief is that we sort of have to look at it, make decisions on what type of green it is, and how it's going to work with the rest of the greens in our scene, and sort of stay in that process. There's a lot of different types of greens, however, you know. So yeah, I'm just going to start mixing. So what I do first, this is one of my go-tos, you know. I love painting backlit scenes, so ultramarine blue and the cadmium yellow middle makes a very dark yet vibrant, rich green. I feel like this happens a lot in backlit scenes, in trees, for example, in bushes and stuff like that. I tend to use a lot of this green, and if we add some white, we can see what happens with it. It goes very chalky, or it goes quite grayish quite fast. So this is also something to think about when we're painting greens. If we're painting a tree that's backlit with this type of dark green, then we want to top lit. It doesn't mean that we're gonna add white to this green, and that will sort of make it same green, brighter value. White doesn't necessarily always give you the same color and brighter value, you know, represented in reality, if that makes any sense. So perhaps what you would do instead is to use more of the yellow and maybe the cold yellow, and see how that would change and turn this. What green would that, how would that green be, you know? What happens if we add white to that, you know? So they come from the same green, you're just making this brighter with a little bit more yellow, because the yellow is quite bright in value in comparison to what that green is. So ultimately mixing those together, you'll get a brighter value, but you won't lose color, because what the white does is that it takes away the color, right? I mean, if you extend it even, you could probably go bright yellow, bright blue, add that in the mix as well, but then it means also you add a little bit more green to it, so it's gonna go that way. But, okay. Well, what I want to first demonstrate for you guys is the big difference between these greens, right? So I'm also gonna do the cerulean blue with the cad yellow middle, and that goes, it's still quite dark in value, you know? This is very dark in value, especially if we compare it to white, right? That is very, very dark, you know? It's a dark and the white is bright. But compared to the dark green that we have right here, which would be the ultramarine and the yellow, there's a huge difference. So sometimes in a situation, you have this being dark, the shadow of a tree, and this green being the top, or the sort of halo surrounding it if it's backlit. But it's still quite warm, so the cerulean blue plus this warm yellow doesn't make it too cold, you know? But as soon as we start to add the titanium white, which is a cold white, then we really see that it goes quite cold quite fast, especially if we compare it to the one on the side. You know? The cobalt I don't use too often when it comes to mixing whites, because it won't be that different from these two. It will be quite similar, you know? The blue isn't super potent when it's mixed, but it is more red than the ceruleum. So there's a slight difference here that maybe you can't even see on the camera or on the video, but this will be more a reddish green and a bluish green because it has, well, just less green in it. So if we want to say that the cobalt is a neutral. We can see what happens to it when we mix some white in there. Still stays quite warm even if we're mixing quite a lot of white in there, especially compared to the ceruleum bluish green. That will be all the blues with cadmium middle yellow. Now let's see with the ultramarine and the yellow gold ochre. So this can be tricky to mix if you don't have medium, and the gold ochre is not very potent at all. This still remains very dark and very bluish, but we fast get to a earthy brownish type of green when we're using the yellow ochre. You know, something that would maybe be more representative of the green of pine trees, and we see what happens to it when we add white. It just goes very dark, very gray, very fast, right? So we can also try the ceruleum and the yellow ochre, and that too goes quite earthy brownish type of green, you know, but it's clear still that it's a green. Maybe that's a still it keeps being quite gray. If we take the cobalt and the gold ochre, again, it is still a very grayish type of green. Now this will go more towards a blue. Just because that blue has less green in it, right? So this will be, say, now this is where it's fun, because it's the same type of yellow, but depending on what blue you're mixing it with, you can see the differences. So these would all classify as greens, but the yellow ochre with the ultramarine is a more reddish type of green than the very greenish type of green that we have here, which would be the ceruleum green and the yellow ochre. The ceruleum is more green than what the ultramarine is, so it has less red, ultimately more yellow. And the same with this, that was supposed to be neutral, so this would be blue by definition. With the yellow, that would be more blue greenish than the green greenish or the red greenish, right? So there's just so many different types of variations of greens that we see, and especially when we put them next to each other, right? So if we move on from the yellow ochre and we do it with the cadmium light, this one is fun, because this cadmium light is so powerful. I just love it. But it's very, very acidic type. It's very chromatic. It's very, very poisonous looking sometimes. I tend to overuse it on a sunny day and make those greens quite cold, because this is quite cold, since we're having the cold yellow right there, you know. And we're gonna see exactly how fast it turns cold when we're mixing white in there. It's not too bad. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's as cold as the second green that we mixed, but it's getting there for sure. This one is a favorite of mine for sure. This is the cerulean blue, which is very green blue, together with this very greenish yellow. Gives you this very, very, very chromatic, poisonous looking green. So I'm going back and forth. And it's not necessarily too cold either, which is kind of fascinating. Because I would say that the cerulean blue is a cold, right? But it is a high chromatic cold yellow green. The difference between these two are very big when it comes down to it, you know. A 50-50 mix makes this way darker in value, for example, than what these two are together, which is also very interesting. But they're very close to value if we actually compare them to white, you know. Then we both know that they're quite dark, right? And we can continue mixing this all day. I actually suggest that you guys do that. It's a very good exercise, and you learn a lot from it. I'm gonna do the last one, which is a cobalt, and the cadmium light green. And we can also see that this is very close to the previous one, the cerulean blue and the cad yellow light. But then again, because it's the cobalt blue, it has less green, more red, even though it's neutral, so it's gonna seem a little bit more reddish to it. And now something that's really, really important in mixing different types of greens is that these are all quite basic. It's blue plus yellow, that's a green, right? Depending on if it's in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, you tend to add more red or orange into the greens, and that gives the green a completely different appearance. The green becomes red. To me, this took a while for me to grasp as well. I was recommended to add red into my greens to get more variation in there, and as soon as I did that, I started to seeing red types of greens outdoors. You know, it's a different type of green, and you can only understand it through experiencing it, if that makes any sense. I'm gonna mix a couple. Let's just start with the ultramarine and the cadmium yellow light. We'll mix this, that is fairly, I mean, it's quite a reddish green already. Should have mixed it under there, but it is a bit brighter than what we did originally. And then we add a little bit of red in there. We just get a different type of green, right? That's what one red green looks like. And this is interesting because here, depending, you have to be very balanced here, right? I only took a little bit of red and it starts to change the green quite fast. And the balance here is that if you add too much red, it's just gonna kill the green completely, turn into red. If you add a perfect amount, you're gonna change it enough to be a different type of green. And in theory, because they're complementary colors, you could have a green and a red and mix that into what would be a black slash, well, dark grayish type of color. And we can actually try to mix that right here and see. So still have it here. Gonna add a little bit more red. See when it turns into a gray. We use this blue. So in theory, all these three colors together would be a primary plus its complementary color, and that essentially means that they will kill each other and turn into something that's a gray. Something that's very little green and not very red, but rather a type of gray. You know, this is, for example, why you can mix something that's really dark with the alizarin red, the cobalt blue. That would mix into a purple, right? A very dark purple. It's looking like a black, and if it's too purple, you add a tiny bit of the high chromatic yellow just to kill the purple a little bit and just keep it going towards a dark gray, meaning you have a black. But my suggestion is, if you want any type of homework, is to just mix these type of different greens and ultimately see what happens when you're adding. See, you have to be careful because it's so potent. See what happens to the greens when you add some red in there. Because you will get a different type of green. But then again, it's vastly different from being the phthalo green that we have here, which is just super chemically looking and synthetic feeling. And this probably would be something more that's the green paint of a house or a car, or the sunroofs in Mediterranean countries. But so it's actually, ultimately what I'm saying is that it's really important to just try to mix different types of greens, and also remembering to add those different types of reds in there, you know. I really want to go for, let's mix a decent amount of this one. Decent amount of this. Okay, so if I add this little red here, this green even drops in value because I added the dark red right there. That becomes more orangey than this one, because that has the vermilion red, which has more yellow in it rather than this one or this one. This one has more blue, for example. This one has a little bit, is more neutral, I guess. Let's see what happens if we add the neutral one. Oh, it's so, God damn it, it's so potent. Okay. So even with this green, cerulean and cadmium yellow middle with the 3 different types of red, and not to mention if we decide to add the cadmium orange, that would also work as a red in this situation. We have 5 different types of greens, and you can add that to all of these, right? So ultimately you get 3 by 3, which is 9, 9 by 3, which is 27. If you add 9 by 4, 9 by 4 is 36, so you have 36 different options, that's just without the white. Adding white, then you probably have 15 different ones on those 36 variations. So think about it, you know? Go out there and try to see the differences in the variations of the greens that we have. So I think that's it. That's the subject of greens, right? Now, before I clean this, I want to show you just an example of what I'm talking about. This is a painting. This is a painting I did in Barcelona not too long ago. Don't mind the weird blue looking towers. This is the National Museum of Catalonia in Spain, under construction. So these are supposed to be nets in the towers. And to me it makes sense. To no one else it has made sense. So, but here I was really fascinated and was really trying to push for that. It's very fast and sketchy type of sketch, but I was really fascinated and really trying to capture and focus on the variations of greens here and see how much like chaos I could do with just the colors, because it's too much to draw every single detail in there. I could sort of make out what type of tree it is, but I really couldn't construct it so it will seem like that tree in terms of drawing. So I really had to focus on what different types of greens are there, you know. There will be brighter bluish greens and there will be brighter yellowish greens. There will maybe more brownish dark greens in there and more neutral dark greens here, warmer greens in the lighter parts. There will be brownish, reddish greens, dark bluish greens, more neutral greens. You know, there's a lot of variations in here, and that ultimately gives the impression of that variation. You know, this is feeling wild and naturalistic just thanks to the use of different types of greens, also different types of brush strokes and brushes, directions and shapes, but with the variation of the greens you really get the sense of an overgrown type of forest or whatever you would like to call it, right? So I can't emphasize it enough when it comes to greens. Try to keep your variations happening in many ways. Mix them, and keep adding those reds in there, and ultimately I think that will be nice. I think you'll do a good job. So that is it for today on the greens. Don't forget to clean that palette, because otherwise your palette will end up looking like what the bottom one looks like here, and that's ultimately not very nice. Okay, so the last thing that I want to say is, well, so it's a tricky subject for sure. It's big and it's complex, and there's probably endless amounts of variations in the greens, I think. But something that's important and something that I really want to share with you guys is that when I'm doing workshops or the courses that I've had, I try to encourage the students to look for the greens, and I do that because looking for them and trying to understand them visually and how to mix them and sort of experiencing them visually is the way you're gonna understand them. So when you go out there and paint, you set up, there's 4 things that you should ask yourself when it comes to the greens. How dark or how bright is it in comparison to the brightest and the darkest thing that you can find? Which is an easy thing. That's about the values, right? It's really important because when it comes to greens, we tend to go a little bit too bright. Just because the variation in greens is so significant that it's difficult to sometimes tell them apart. We can look in reality and see a certain green, mix it on the palette and say, hey, that's the exact same one, spot on. And then as you're finishing the painting and putting more information in there, you understand that there's something not working, and it's because you painted exactly what you're seeing, or more or less what the green you're seeing is. And it means that the value is actually off. You know, it's gonna be brighter in your painting than what it is in reality, because the compression part needs to be applied into the process as well. Second thing is, what green is it? Is it blue or is it yellow? Because when we're mixing a green, we are essentially using blue and yellow. So depending on which blue, which yellow, the amount of blue or the amount of yellow, the green is going to lean towards either a blue or a yellow. The third question is, does it have any red in it? Fourth question, which temperature does that green have? This is probably the trickiest bit, because when it comes to temperature, it's all relative. This is a very clear example for what a warm blue is like, but it's always relative, you know? This cad red in comparison to the cold red, that's very warm. In comparison to the warm, it's quite cold. So depending on what pigments you have on your palette will ultimately decide which one is cold and which one is warm, right? So with this palette, I feel like it's very clear, but you can always have 3 cold blues within each other. One will be warmer, one will be colder, one will most likely be neutral. So with this palette, I feel like it's very easy to distinct them all in their temperatures. I know that if I mix the ultramarine blue with the cad middle yellow, I'm gonna get a warm green, right? But this is also something we have to keep in mind, the quality of the paint and what it has inside it. We know that the ultramarine is a reddish blue and the cad yellow middle is also reddish yellow. So I know that when I mix this and this, I get a green that also has a little bit of red in there, which ultimately means I don't need a lot of red maybe in there to make it go gray. So this is also something to keep in mind. But this is something that you'll understand and figure out a little bit on your own as you paint and as you experience different situations. What I can encourage the most is just to go out there, look for different type of greens, especially go out in the evening in the forest as the sun is setting and look at those greens out there. They're really, really beautiful, and most of them are quite red. And that's how you get an experience of seeing what red greens really look like, you know? So yeah, I'm a firm believer in learn by doing, so just go out and do it, and I hope this taught you at least a little bit on the subject of greens. Thanks guys, take care.